What would you do if your school's intercom suddenly turned on in the middle of the night when absolutely no one was supposed to be there? This happened to me, and it's something I'll never forget. I used to be part of the night cleanup crew at my old high school. It was a decent gig, mostly quiet. Just me, my headphones, and the long, empty hallways. The school at night has a completely different vibe. It's eerie, all the usual noise replaced by a deep, humming silence. One night, I was mopping the main corridor. It was well past midnight, probably closer to 1 in the morning. The entire building was dark, except for the section I was working in. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence. A sharp crackle, followed by that all-too-familiar electronic screech of the PA system turning on. I stopped, pulling my headphones off. My heart started hammering against my ribs. It had to be a malfunction, right? Some kind of electrical glitch. But then, a voice came through. It was faint, distorted by the old speakers, but it was unmistakably a human voice. It said, "Students, please remain in your classrooms. Do not go near the windows." I just stood there, frozen, mop handle gripped tight in my hands. Students? What students? The school had been completely empty for at least 8 hours. The voice was shaky, filled with an urgency that made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded ... scared, genuinely terrified. My mind was racing. Was this a prank? Were some kids hiding in the school, messing with me? But the main doors were locked and chained from the inside. I was the only one with a key to the janitor's entrance. The silence returned for a moment, and I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the long hours were finally getting to me. I took a deep breath, ready to dismiss it. And the voice came back, even more desperate this time. "They're here again." That's what it said. "They're here again." The words echoed down the empty hall, and a cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a prank. The sheer terror in that voice was too real. Who were they? What was happening? My first instinct was to get out. Just drop everything and run. But another part of me, the part that was morbidly curious, and maybe a little too brave for its own good, needed to know what was going on. I thought about the source, the main office. That's where the intercom system was controlled. Against my better judgment, I started walking, my footsteps echoing way too loudly in the silent school. The office was at the other end of the building. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, every little creak of the old building making me jump. My imagination was running wild, picturing figures in the dark classrooms, faces peering out from behind the doors. When I finally reached the office, the door was locked, just as I'd left it. I fumbled with my master key, my hands shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to get the lock to turn. I pushed the door open and flicked on the light. The office was exactly as it should be, papers neatly stacked, chairs pushed in. I rushed over to the corner where the PA system console sat on a small desk. And what I saw made my blood run cold. The main power cord for the entire system was unplugged from the wall. It was coiled neatly on the floor, covered in a thin layer of dust, like it hadn't been touched in weeks. It was impossible. There was no physical way for the intercom to have turned on. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the unplugged cord, trying to make sense of it. I didn't hear the voice again that night. I finished my shift in a state of pure anxiety, constantly looking over my shoulder, and got out of there the second the sun started to rise. The next morning, I knew I had to tell someone. I waited for the principal, Mr. Harrison, to arrive. I found him in his office, sipping his morning coffee. I was hesitant, worried he'd think I was crazy or making it up. But I told him everything. The crackle of the PA, the terrified voice, the exact words I heard. As I spoke, I watched his face. He listened patiently, but as I got to the part about the message, "Students, please remain in your classrooms," Do not go near the windows. All the color drained from his face. He went pale, his coffee mug clattering as he set it down on his desk. He just stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of shock and something else, something that looked like fear. He leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. He told me that in 1999, years before I was even a student there, the school had gone into a real, serious lockdown. There was an intruder on the grounds, someone dangerous. During that lockdown, the principal at the time had made an announcement over the PA system. And the words he used were the exact same ones I had heard. Students, please remain in your classrooms. Do not go near the windows. And then he told me the worst part. The lockdown had ended, and the intruder was caught. But during the chaos, one of the teachers, a young woman who stayed late to grade papers, went missing from her classroom. They searched the entire school, the entire town. They never found her. Her car was still in the parking lot. All her belongings were in her classroom. She just vanished that night, the night of the lockdown, the night the terrified voice echoed through the halls for real. The last person to supposedly see her was the night janitor, who swore he heard her talking to someone in her room just before she disappeared. I never took the night shift again after that. Sometimes I wonder, was it her voice I heard? A warning, echoing through time? Or was it something else, reliving that terrifying night over and over again? Have you ever walked down your old school hallway and felt a sudden chill? Or noticed something just ... off? Every school has its stories, its legends. But some legends are more than just whispers in the library. Some were real. Today, we're going to talk about one such story, a story that turns a normal, everyday object into a source of bone-chilling fear. This is the story of the locker that never opened. In the main corridor of Northwood High, right between the chemistry lab and the gymnasium, there was one locker that stood out. Not because it was shiny or new, but because it was always closed. Its faded blue paint was chipped, and a rusty, old-school combination lock hung from its handle, untouched by time. This was locker number 228. For almost 2 decades, no student had ever used it. The freshmen were told it was just broken, but the seniors knew the real story. They'd whisper it in hushed tones during lunch breaks. They said the locker was haunted. It belonged to a student who one day just never came home. And ever since, the locker had remained sealed, a silent monument to a forgotten tragedy. The official school story was simple. The lock was jammed, and the combination was lost to time. The janitors would just clean around it, never trying to force it open. It became part of the school's landscape, a piece of quiet, unnerving history that everyone just accepted. Students would sometimes dare each other to touch it, to try and jiggle the lock, but no one ever stayed for long. There was an unspoken coldness that seemed to emanate from the metal door, a feeling that you were being watched. Some kids claimed they'd hear faint scratching from inside late at night, or see the lock gently swaying when there was no breeze. Of course, everyone dismissed it as imagination, as the product of an old, creaky building. But the unease was always there, hanging in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. Then came the summer of 2023. The school district had finally approved a budget for major renovations. The old hallways were going to be modernized, the floors redone, and yes, all the old, battered lockers were scheduled to be replaced. This meant that after 20 years, locker number 228 had to be opened. The construction crew, unaware of the legends, brought in their tools. A crowd of summer school students and a few curious teachers gathered at a safe distance, watching as a worker approached with a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. The air was thick with anticipation. With a loud metallic snap, the old lock broke and fell to the floor with a clang that echoed unnaturally down the empty hall. The worker pulled the handle, and with a groan of protesting metal, The door creaked open for the first time since 2003. At first, it looked exactly like what you'd expect from an abandoned locker. A few faded, spiral-bound notebooks, their pages yellowed and brittle. A textbook for a class that wasn't even taught anymore. A couple of dried-up pens, and some ancient, fossilized gum wrappers. It was a time capsule, a dusty glimpse into a student's life from 2 decades ago. The foreman was about to tell his crew to clear it all out, to just trash it and move on. But then, one of the teachers who had been watching pointed towards the back of the locker. Taped to the interior wall, yellowed and curling at the edges, was a single Polaroid photograph. Curiosity got the better of them. The foreman carefully peeled the photo from the wall. It showed a group of 5 students, maybe 6, all dressed in the school's old uniform, smiling and laughing, arms slung around each other. It was a typical high school snapshot, full of life and youthful energy. But as everyone leaned in closer, a collective gasp went through the small crowd. There was someone else in the photo. Standing just behind the main group, slightly out of focus, was another figure. It was wearing the same uniform, had the same posture as a student, but something was terribly wrong. Where its face should have been, there was only a blur, a smudge of distorted color, as if the camera had failed to capture its features. Or as if it never had any features to begin with. A deep sense of dread settled over everyone present. The photo was passed around, each person staring in disbelief at the faceless figure lurking in the background. The story of the student who never came home suddenly felt a lot more real. The crew quickly cleared out the locker, throwing everything into a black trash bag, but they kept the photo, handing it over to the school principal. That should have been the end of it. A creepy discovery, a good story to tell, but nothing more. But the story of locker number 228 wasn't finished. As part of the renovations, new security cameras had been installed throughout the school. That very night, after the locker had been emptied, the motion-activated camera in that hallway triggered an alert. The security guard on duty, bored and scrolling through his phone, glanced at the monitor. He saw a flicker of movement near the new empty locker bay where number 228 used to be. Thinking it was probably just a rat or a bird that had gotten inside, he rewound the footage to get a better look. He played it back in slow motion. Frame by frame, he watched the empty hallway. Nothing. And then, for a single solitary frame, the image glitched. The screen filled with digital static, but just for a split second, an image burned through the noise. Standing right where locker number 228 had been was the figure from the photograph. The same uniform, the same posture, and the same terrifying, featureless face staring directly into the camera lens. The guard dropped his coffee, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched it again and again, but the glitch was gone. The footage was just a clean, empty hallway. But he knew what he saw. The school never officially acknowledged. Every school has its secrets, those whispered legends passed down through generations of students. Every school has that one place nobody wants to go. For us, that place was Classroom 3A. It was a ghost story we all knew, a dark spot on the school map. The official story was simple. An electrical fire back in the 90s had rendered the room structurally unsafe. It had been sealed off ever since, a dusty, forgotten relic just down the hall from our normal, everyday classes. For years, it was just at a locked door with a story. But stories have a way of becoming real. It was the last week of school, right before final exams. The air was thick with the nervous energy of studying and the sweet promise of summer freedom. Our homeroom teacher, Mr. Harrison, was trying to clear out some space in our own classroom. He pointed a thumb down the hallway. "All right, everyone," he said. "I need a few of you to help me move these old desks. We're going to store them in 3A for the summer." A nervous murmur rippled through the class. 3A? Nobody wanted to go near it. But a teacher's request is a teacher's request, especially during exam week. So, along with two of my friends, I volunteered. Mr. Harrison handed me a single, old-fashioned brass key. It felt heavy and cold in my palm. As we walked down the deserted hallway, the usual sounds of the school seemed to fade away. It was just the three of us and the rhythmic squeak of our sneakers on the linoleum floor. The door to 3A was at the very end of the corridor, its paint peeling, a stark contrast to the freshly painted walls around it. I put the key in the lock. It was stiff, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it to turn. The click of the lock opening was unnervingly loud in the silence. The moment the door creaked open, a blast of frigid air washed over us. It was a hot day in June, but the air that poured out of that room was like stepping into a walk-in freezer. It carried a strange, acrid smell, like burnt wood and something else. Something old and sad. We hesitated at the doorway, peering into the gloom. Sunlight struggled to pierce through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in the air. Everything, and I mean everything, was covered in a thick gray blanket of dust. The floor, the walls, the old-fashioned chalkboard, it all looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. We started carrying the desks in, the noise of our movements echoing strangely in the dead air. That's when I saw it. In the back corner of the room, almost hidden in the shadows, was a single desk that stood out. While every other surface was caked in dust, this one was completely clean. It looked like it had been wiped down just moments before. I ran my finger across the wooden surface, leaving a streak on my skin, but there was no dust. It was just clean. My eyes traced the smooth wood until they landed on a small carving on the top right corner. 2 words etched neatly into the desk. Miela. It was weird, but in a school full of weird things, I didn't think too much of it at the time. We finished moving the desks, locked the door, and returned the key. The cold feeling from the room lingered with me for the rest of the day. That night, at the dinner table, I casually mentioned it to my mom. "We had to go into that old abandoned classroom today," I said, "the one that had the fire." 3A. My mom stopped eating, her fork hovering in midair. "They made you go in there?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. I shrugged. Yeah, it was creepy. Everything was covered in dust, except for this one desk. Someone had carved a name into it. Mia Lal. The color drained from my mom's face. She put her fork down slowly, her eyes wide. "Mia L?" she whispered. "You don't mean Nia Latham?" I'd never heard the name before. "I guess," I said. "Who's that?" My mom took a shaky breath. "She was a girl in my class when I was your age," she said, her voice barely audible. "She was so bright, always drawing in her notebook. She didn't make it out of the fire. She died in that classroom. In 3A. A chill, colder than anything I'd felt in that room, shot down my spine. The clean desk. The name. It couldn't be a coincidence. I barely slept that night, the image of that empty, clean desk haunting my dreams. The next morning at school, the atmosphere was tense. The janitor, a burly man named Mr. Henderson, who was usually cheerful, looked pale and spooked. He was talking in a hushed, urgent tone to Mr. Harrison right outside the main office. We all tried to eavesdrop. "I'm telling you, I locked that door myself last night after they were done," Mr. Henderson was saying, his voice shaking. "I checked it twice, but when I came in this morning, the door to 3A was wide open." Mr. Harrison looked skeptical. "Maybe the lock is just old. Maybe it didn't catch." "No," Mr. Henderson insisted. "That's not the worst part. I went inside to check things out. There were footprints in the dust on the floor." He paused, looking around as if he was afraid someone might hear. But they were fresh. And they didn't lead into the room. They only led out. We never went back into classroom 3A. They boarded it up properly a week later. But sometimes, when I walk past that part of the hall, I can still feel it. A pocket of unnatural cold. A reminder that some stories aren't just stories. And some secrets don't stay buried. They walk out on their own. Thanks for watching. If you have a story about a haunted place you know, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more strange tales. Stay safe out there.